That's a real important part of the writing process that a lot of programs or classes or workshops overlook, right? So you go to a class and it says how to create a really great character, for example, and you walk away, one, saying, well, okay, I know how to create a great character, but how does that relate to my Bob Smith in my novel, in my mystery? How am I going to make my character better? So there's a lack of application of the craft knowledge. But more importantly, this point that you bring up about mindset, it's challenging to be a writer.
Hi, I'm James Taylor, business creativity and innovation keynote speaker, and this is The Creative Life, a show dedicated to you, the creative. If you're looking for motivation, inspiration, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's an author, musician, entrepreneur, performer, designer, or thought leader. They'll share with you their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, and much, much more. You'll find show notes for this episode as well as free training on creativity over at jamestaylor.me. Enjoy this episode. In today's episode, I speak with Annalisa Parent, and we talk about the mindset of writers, why you should hire a writing coach, and the power of writers' retreats. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to welcome onto the show Annalisa Parent. Annalisa helps writers to finish, publish, and sell their novels. She owns and operates Date with the Muse LLC, which helps storytellers to publish traditionally at the highest level possible. Her book, Storytelling for Pantsers: How to Outline and Revise Your Novel Without an Outline, has been lauded by New York Times bestselling author John David Mann. He said her book was brimming over with invaluable practical writerly wisdom. Annalisa writes for many local, national, and international publications and has been featured on Huffington Post Live for her novels, as well as CBS, Associated Press, and Korean broadcast systems. She believes in taking the writing craft seriously without taking herself too seriously, and attempts to heed the wisdom of the ancient Roman poet Horace, who said, "Mix a little foolishness with your prudence. It's good to be silly at the right time." So it's my pleasure to have Annalisa with us today, so welcome.
Thank you so much, James. It's a pleasure to be with you here today on your podcast.
So share with everyone what's going on in your world just now. What are you up to at the moment?
Oh my goodness, so much. So helping many writers to become authors right now. So that's really exciting. I start my day every day meeting with authors on their manuscripts, which I love. And then in my own world, I am revising one of my novels right now to get back to my agent, and also looking to submit some poetry real soon. So really exciting things coming up, and also creating a poetry course for will be poets. Looking forward to that as well.
So how did you get into this world of coaching and helping writers? Where did it all begin for you?
So, I was a storyteller from way back. I'm sure my mom can attest to that, telling stories as soon as I could speak, I'm sure. And I've always had that impulse, that need to tell story, to create story. I created a family publication as a child, as I'm sure many writers have. I had my first poem published when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I got to read it on the State House lawn. So it's something that I've always been really passionate about. And then started doing as soon as I could. I was published early, published my first novel early, became a journalist as soon as I possibly could. I was still in college when I got my first cub reporter position. And so storytelling is really important to me. And after I had a lot of experience, both storytelling and teaching, it became time for me to really intersect those officially and professionally, and to help others to do what they wanted to do. There's so many people out there who have stories to tell, want to share their stories, and they don't know how, whether it's just getting it out of them, or then, I've got it out, what do I do with it now? And I can help them to do that because I've been there, and because I've got the teaching experience to really optimize their brain functioning to help them to find their best writer and to get their story out.
Now, I was reading a book the other day. I think it was Lamont. It was called Bird by Bird, and it's a really great book on the kind of writing process. And as I was reading, I was thinking, how much of this writing game is mental, is psychological, and how much of it is craft? So when you're working with the authors that you coach and you help, when you're having those discussions, how much time are you spending on just kind of them and their confidence and all the things that they're probably kind of gnawing away in their head about, is this good enough? Am I the right person to write? And how much time are you spending with them actually on the craft and going through the book itself and making it the best book possible?
I am so glad that you asked that question, James, because that's a real important part of the writing process that a lot of programs or classes or workshops overlook, right? So you go to a class and it says how to create a really great character, for example, and you walk away, saying, well, okay, I know how to create a great character, but how does that relate to my Bob Smith in my novel, in my mystery? How am I going to make my character better? So there's a lack of application of the craft knowledge. But more importantly, this point that you bring up about mindset, it's challenging to be a writer. And I will tell you what, if you're telling your story, whether you're telling it as memoir and you're actually the protagonist of your piece, or whether you've fictionalized an aspect of your life, stuff comes up, right? And sometimes it's things that you don't necessarily want to see or know about yourself. And then to add a layer onto that, you've got people criticizing you, whether you share your writing at the wrong time and ask for feedback and get something you don't want to hear, or, your readers in the future who are commenting on your protagonist and ouch, actually that was me and that really happened to me. So that mindset is such an important part of the writer's journey. And the programs that I've created to help writers uniquely address not only the craft principles, of course we're going to address the craft principles, they're also addressing marketability. So what's currently trending in the industry right now, and I speak to professionals every week so that I'm really up on what's happening. And lastly, that super important piece that you bring up, which is this thing we do is hard. And, you deal with all types of creatives. And so, typically creatives feel an impulse. They must get their story out. But then the flip side is that someone's going to be commenting on that and that it's hard. And so we have this constant push-pull of needing to get our story out, but fearing to get our story out. And we address all aspects of the writer. We talk about looking at the writer as a whole person, not just a writer who wants to become an author, but, the struggle of what is my story? What can I say? Memoirists frequently say, how much can I say without getting in trouble? These are really important questions to talk about and have someone to talk about with.
So I was talking with a friend the other day, and she's gone through this situation. She's gone through a big divorce, and she said, some of this stuff you couldn't make up. I'm writing all this stuff. She's doing a creative writing course, and I'm writing all this stuff down because it's going to be material for what I'm doing. And because this is like, you just couldn't make this stuff up. And I'm really looking forward to kind of writing it. And she's kind of like starting to craft. But she said one thing I'm not sure what I'm going to do is whether I should use my own name to write this book, or whether I should create a pen name, or whether I should just figure out how to change things significantly enough so that it's not about me. It's not a kind of memoir, and I kind of write it in a slightly different way. What advice would you give to a writer like that?
That's a really good question. And what I've found in my experience is that time answers that question for the author. It's really hard when we're writing something autobiographical to fictionalize that 100% because we're too invested. And so when we're too invested in something, it's too difficult to receive feedback. And so I've been on this journey with a lot of authors who want to write about their kids, their grandkids, their parents, whatever it is. And when they get feedback, it becomes deeply, deeply emotional because it's really real for them. And so the time is really important to answer that question because, time heals all wounds. We have that cliche for a reason. And once we get that distance from the event, we can really determine whether this story is best told from a didactic point of view. So if you've been through a divorce, you might say, hey, I've been through a divorce. Here are some things I've learned. From an autobiographical point of view, where you just say, here are the things that I went through, take your lessons as you will. Or if you fictionalize that so that you can maybe tell a little bit more than you might be able to tell in an autobiographical recounting of that event. And so, that time is going to help you to figure out what your point of view for your piece is, but also to help you with receiving critique, constructive criticism that's going to make your piece publishable.
And when writers come to you to kind of work together, what is the general stage that they're at with their writing? Are many of them, they haven't kind of written anything, or they've maybe written things at school, but they just kind of want to get back into it? Or are these people that are coming to you with an outline or maybe a first draft that they're looking to develop? Or is it people that have actually kind of been working on things for many, many years and they've finally, they want to show it to someone else and get a kind of professional view? What's the most kind of common situation you find yourself in?
Yes.
Yes. Tick all the above.
So we really work with writers at 3 different phases. So in the first phase, we want them to complete a draft of a manuscript. So that might mean that they've got, a couple chapters written, they've already got a draft, they just have an idea. Any of those would work, but we want them to have a completed draft because you can't edit a draft until you have a draft to edit. So getting that first draft done well is really important. And so we're going to go back to those craft principles that we've already talked about, the principles of telling a quality, engaging, page-turning story, and also that marketability piece. We're going to enhance that in phase 2, where we're going to take that draft and really make it publishable, which again takes into account that page-turning craft principles and the marketability. And then I help them to get an agent, to get their representation and their publisher as part of the process. And then we move into enhancing their author platform, because publishing houses, while they do give some support to traditionally published authors, if you're a first-time author, they're not going to take a huge gamble on you. And so you're going to want to augment the processes that they're using to market your book, have something in place in addition to what they're giving you as a first-time author.
And of those kind of 3 stages that you kind of outlined there that you're working at, that first stage drafting and then kind of going on, is there a part of one of those stages where you tend to find people like some of Stephen Pressfield will talk about resistance in that way, or they go to those the deep kind of darker parts of their soul when they actually get to the point where they go, I don't know if I can carry on. Is there a part in those stages where you find we're coming up to that stage again? Is that part that when you get the call or you have that conversation with them and they just go, I don't know if I can do this?
Yeah, I think that's in phase 2. Phase 1, finishing the manuscript is difficult, but it's really about, apply butt to chair, apply fingers to keyboard, make this happen. And there is, some stamina there, some discipline around working through some of the hard parts of the moments where you need to drag the story out of you versus the moments where you feel like the muse is carrying you and you're flying away with her or him. In phase 2, we start to make really difficult decisions. And for most authors, we have one of those come to Jesus moments where I have to say something like, you've got to make a choice and there's no right answer here. This is really about what you want for your future. My job is to tell you what the consequences of each of those decisions are. And usually it's around, you can stick with what you've created as a story and the narrative that you've created, and you're going to have to self-publish. Or you can make this choice in your narrative, make this switch, and you've got a series of choices, and it will be more marketable, and you can publish that traditionally. And again, there's no right choice here. but there are consequences for each one. So what do you want for your future, for your writing career? And that's a really hard moment that I would say at least 50% of our authors confront, because, ultimately a publishing house is a business. They're looking to make money. They're looking to find books that are going to help them to make money. So my job as a writing coach is to help authors to produce the types of products that these houses are looking for so that they can live their dream and be a published author, not once, not twice, but as many times as they want to.
And in terms of someone that's thinking about working with a writing coach, is there a type of author or a stage in an author's development when a writing coach is going to be most effective? Is it on that first book, having someone to kind of guide you through that process? Or do you actually find you end up having to work with people that are writing that difficult second book, where the first one is just like ideas, the muse has taken them, and now they've got the second book, and like, I feel like I've left it all on the on the field there with that first one. I don't know where to go. Who are those people that are kind of coming to you the most? What stage are they at in their writing career?
That's a super interesting question. I think that a writing coach is applicable at any point in your career because each book is its own creation. So I've worked with many authors on their first and second book, and I've worked with authors on their seventh and ninth and 12th book. It's especially relevant if you're switching genres. You might want to work with someone. Having a qualified professional to give you feedback is always a good thing. And if we think about, the NFL, the National Football League, I'm not an expert on the NFL, but I know that these players, have a kicking coach and a movement coach, and they have all kinds of coaches who help to support them. Now, these people have been playing football for a really long time. Of anybody out there, they should be the experts, and yet they still have several coaches to tweak, not to teach them how to kick. They already know that, but how do we, enhance that? How do we move our toe just 1 centimeter over? And so that's true, I think, for writers as well. We can always improve our craft. We can always improve our marketability, and having that professional there, is good for the craft. But I think getting back to your point about Anne Lamont, it never changes that writing is a difficult thing, that the creative process is both cathartic and difficult, right? It gives to us and it takes from us at the same time in different ways. And having somebody to walk with us along that journey is a really powerful experience.
So when your authors are coming to you, regardless of what stage they're at, what do you think are there kind of really recurring issues or problems that you have to work with them on, that you just see kind of time and time again, that regardless of what stage they're at in their writing career, okay, we're coming up for this thing now? You're seeing these kind of repeated problems that authors have. I
think the two main problems that I see are that authors think that their novel is finished and it's not. And, I talk to a lot of literary agents about this because they end up seeing a lot of these manuscripts that then go into the slush pile. And so having that professional set of eyes to show them why it's not finished, even though it felt finished, is really important. And one of the main problems that I see there is in the pacing. So it's not a page turner, right? There's too much backstory, or there's not enough backstory sometimes, or, we've got a really nice character arc, but there's no overarching plot arc, or there are holes in those arcs. And, to be fair, even in my own writing, it's true for all of us. These are hard things to see in our own writing. It's really easy to think that you're done, and then somebody says, but, and you say, oh, yeah, that's a really good point. So having somebody to be that set of eyes is really important. And to answer your question, thinking that you're done and you're not quite done, and the pacing of that piece, which of course is tied up in character arcs, plot arcs, all of the pieces, the ingredients that make a quality story.
Because it must be difficult. I mean, a writer's getting so close to their work. They've read it, they've written it, they've read it countless times. They're there with it. They need someone like you to be able to take a step back and actually see those overarching things that are happening, and like, oh, actually, in that part there, it's lacking. It feels like it's lacking you're talking about pacing of this particular scene, and that character. Well, you haven't really completed. You haven't closed that loop there, and so having someone like you gives you that ability to kind of to do that. And one of the things that I see on your site, you also talk about, in addition to the kind of the mentoring that you work with, your coaching you work with clients, you also do copy editing and content editing. So I think it'd be useful. What is the difference? Because when we hear like, okay, the book is going to an editor, but there's different types of editing. Can you explain the difference between what a copy editor v a content editor is?
Absolutely. So let me touch first on where you started, which was on feedback, and that's relevant to the content edit. And so one of the things that happens a lot is that writers think, oh, I just need to share this with some beta readers. I'm going to go find some beta readers. And that's a good impulse. But what ends up happening with beta readers is that they say things like, your character doesn't work. Well, that's really good feedback, but it doesn't give a direction for where that could go. So one of the writers that I'm working with right now worked with a lot of beta readers, and he knew when he came to me with his novel that it didn't quite work, but he didn't know why. So having someone who's an expert in story is really important, because I can tell you why the character doesn't work, why the plot doesn't work, and I can give you some choices, right? And that's really important, because there are editors out there who will say, well, your character doesn't work because he needs to be 6 feet tall and he needs to have brown hair, and they give you really specific things to change. That's not my style. My style is, this character isn't working because we don't have enough physical description. So you need to think about what that means and really how that's tied into who he is as a character, right? That's a very different thing from telling someone how to write their novel. That's really important to the work that I do. So just in general, when you think about hiring someone to work on your work, what style do you want?
Do you want someone to be very prescriptive, or do you want someone to kind of give a series of options that understand what the problem is, be able to diagnose what the problem is, but then say, okay, there's a couple of ways you can go with this. Where do you want to go?
Exactly. And all of those fall under the content edit. And, the other thing that's really interesting, my philosophy is I want my writers to become better writers, and I want them to become independent. Publish a 1,000th novel if that's what they want to do, and that's their dream. So I work very closely with them. We're meeting twice a week. We're going over the pages. We're talking about why I wrote the comments that I wrote and what their choices are. Other editors, you might send them your manuscript. They send it back with all their notes. The end. That's the end of your relationship, and there's no conversation there. They're not interested in you becoming a better writer. They're just interested in this one manuscript. So that's another question to ask when you think about your content editor. What are you getting out of this? Is this a relationship? Is it a long-term investment in you as a writer, or is this a one-off on a manuscript? And which do you want? Do you want to become a better writer, or do you want a one-off on a manuscript? So all of those fall under content editing. And then copy editing is the person who comes in usually right before you submit your manuscript for publication and fixes your commas and your em dashes and your en dashes, and make sure your dialogue is punctuated. And it's important to note, and this is just my philosophy, but I will never copy edit a manuscript that I have content edited, because I've got the same blinders that the author has. I know what that author meant. We've talked about it in depth. I am not going to be able to see their periods and commas and em dashes anymore. I'm completely invested in that manuscript. So that's just something, that's a good tip for people to think about. If somebody's invested a lot of time in the content of your manuscript, they probably have the same blinders that you have when it comes to looking at the syntax of that manuscript.
Now, you mentioned working in quite an intensive way with your clients, meeting twice a week. I also noticed you do retreats, and I've always been kind of intrigued by this. Our company, we do a lot of creative retreats, mostly in music and songwriting and things like that. And I've always been really intrigued about what would be on a writing retreat, especially one that's a fiction writing retreat. So in such a short period of time, maybe you got a 3-day retreat or a 4-day retreat. What is kind of covered in something like that?
Sure. So we do 5-day retreats. We're actually coming back to England.
Yay!
Yes, we write in Devon at a manor house there. And if I can do a shout out, if people want to take a look at that, it's datewiththemuse.com/England. And we do small retreats. We only have 6 participants, and that's intentional so that everyone can get one-on-one attention for what it is that they're writing and really optimize their most creative self. So the purpose of a writing retreat in the way that I do them is, one, to have a retreat. And what that means is time away from your busy life, your kids, the dirty dishes, whatever, to really find your creativity and focus on that. And secondly, again, we're nurturing the whole writer. So having that time away to eat delicious food, to sleep in a beautiful bed, in a quiet place. This particular manor house that we go to is listed on the UNESCO site for nighttime views of the night sky. So it's just really beautiful. It's a great place to be, fresh air, sheep in the background. It's amazing. To say nothing of the fact that the Romantic poets wrote there, and so there's this rich literary history in that area. All of those are really important elements to nurturing creativity. That's just the backdrop. What do we do there? Well, all of the work that I do is based on my study of neuroscience. And so we are tapping into the way that your brain learns and creates the best. And we're doing some multimodal work. So what that means, that fancy word, is that, we might finger paint. We haven't done that yet, but we could finger paint and then write, or we could write and then build with blocks and then finger paint and then write again. Really making the synaptic movement in our brain optimized for creativity. In addition to the writing out, because everybody who comes to our retreat is actively working on finishing a manuscript, and so getting into that creative zone, as any of your listeners know, because I'm sure they know what the creative zone is like. Once you're in that zone, you are going, and you're just following. You're on a slide, and it's just taking you where you're going. We want to get people into that zone so they can write and write and write in this environment where there are no distractions. It's beautiful synergy. And then the last thing about that is that we are, everyone at the retreat gets an opportunity to meet with me one-on-one to talk about whatever they want to talk about with me as their personal coach. So at our most recent England retreat, there were people who came to me with an article. They wanted to expand their author platform, and they said, will this article get me where I want to go as far as visibility? Other people came to me with a portion of their manuscript and said, is this character working? Is this going to happen for me? Other people wanted to talk about the direction of their career in general. Which novel should I focus on if this is where I want to end up? So it's really time for that writer to look at their career, their manuscript in progress, whatever it is that's going on. Those are the important ingredients for the writing retreats that I do and how we operate. But at the end, what people should walk away with is feeling really creative, feeling really confident, and having this bonding experience with other people who are doing what they're doing and struggling with the same questions and problems that they're struggling with and have found effective solutions.
I love that. I just love the idea of a retreat like that. And, the part you said also at the end, that you are part of a community. Okay, it's 6 other students, that are other writers that are there, but so often what we do in any creative work is quite a solitary activity. To be around other people that are just as crazy as you and doing this strange thing that we do, I think is a really actually quite an empowering part as well. And having all those conversations to be able to say, oh, wow, it's not just me that kind of thinks about that. It's not just me that has made procrastination into an art form. So I think retreats are incredibly powerful. And I love the fact that you keep them very small, because it's not like a massive thing as well. So people really get that one-on-one time. They get that very detailed kind of attention as well. So good to you. So, and I did wonder though, do you have any plans to do one in France? Because I noticed you have a particularly amazing award in French award. So you should probably first of all explain what that award is and why you got it. But do you have any plans to do one in Paris? Because I'm sure a lot of people would love the idea of doing a writing retreat with you in the south of France or in Paris.
So I will be in Paris next June. I have several speaking events and workshops that I will be doing in Paris. We don't have a retreat planned per se, but it could happen. So yes, I have a very interesting award. It's the equivalent of a Congressional Medal of Honor, which I received on a speaking tour of France, a 5-week speaking tour dedicated to peace and understanding among people. And I spoke in French about the United States and what we do here and how we live, and met with a lot of French people. I was part of a team. There were 5 of us speaking together, and we each were awarded this award for our efforts toward peace and understanding amongst cultures.
Amazing. What a great honor that must have been as well. And I know there's obviously a very strong linkage between writers like Benjamin Franklin, very strong linkage between France and America, and that's a very long-term relationship your two countries have had as well. Can you tell us, like, in your journey then as an author, was there a time when you were working on a project, working on something, and you gave it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason it just didn't work out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what was the lesson that you took from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens for all of us, regardless of what medium we're working in, that we work towards something and it just won't come together, or more frequently, it's not accepted right now. And we've got, thousands or hundreds of these years of stories of artists who, it wasn't their right time, right? Posthumously, they became very popular. In music, in art, that's happened. And so I think sometimes just accepting, now isn't the right time, and it's not personal. It's not personal to me, and it's not personal to the quality of the piece. It's just not time. I'm ahead of my time. I'm behind my time. The pendulum hasn't swung yet. And really keeping that in perspective, and that it's not about the quality of the piece per se. It might not just be time for that piece. And, as a corollary to that, moving on to the next thing and not getting caught up in, I have to focus on this one thing. This thing has to happen before I can create anything else. It's okay to have lots of irons in the fire, and lots of creative types. That's a question they have for me. They're like, well, I'm working on a painting and I've got 2 novels, and that's great. Just follow your creativity, but have a plan. If publishing and getting your work out into the world is important, have a plan for how that's going to happen. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of half-finished paintings and novels around your house.
A lot of half-dug holes, as they say, as well, in the yard. What about, as you've been progressing in your creative journey, was there a key insight that you had, an aha moment, a light bulb moment where you said, this is the kind of thing I want to write, or this is the kind of what I want to leave the world in some way?
Well, if we're thinking about the best advice that we ever had, one of my writing mentors was Julia Alvarez, and she said a lot of really clever things, but one of the best things that she ever said to us was, writers who succeed are writers who apply butt to chair. And that's a paraphrase of someone else, but it's true. And, I hit a moment where I was mastering in procrastination. As you said, I'd made it into an art form. And then one of my college friends, his brother is Mike Birbiglia. His brother is Mike Birbiglia, and he's a famous comedian now. Well, he wasn't that way when we were in college. He was just, brother of guy I went to school with. And when he came out with his movie a couple of years ago, I saved the movie ticket and I put it above my writing desk, and I just wrote, writers write. Writers write. And that's all that Mike did to get where he was. He just kept doing it and doing it and doing it until suddenly he had his own movie. And now, most people, I think, know who he is. And he's a real inspiration for me because he just kept at it. And really, that's what you've got to do. You just keep doing it. You get rejected, you keep doing it. You mess up, you keep doing it. You just keep moving forward.
I think it was Austin Kleon possibly said that a lot of people want to be the noun but don't want to do the verb. And I thought that's, people want to be writers but don't want to write, and there's people want to be speakers but don't want to speak, and you kind of have to do the verb, I guess. What about, are there any tools that you use that you find very useful in your writing and the coaching and what you do with clients?
I love Google Docs. The reason why I love Google Docs and I use it with my clients is because there's only ever one version. So if you're using Word or one of its cousins, you have to play that game of like, well, which draft and which one? You can track your changes. You can see when the last time somebody was in there. So is it my turn or your turn? It just makes life really, really easy. And then, of course, you can export it as a PDF or a doc if you need to submit it for something. But I love that as a tool for working with authors and for having the one draft, the one version.
And then, what about a book? Obviously, apart from your own book, is there a book you think a lot of people would benefit from reading, either about the craft or the mindset of being a writer?
When I read Stephen King's On Writing way back, right before I got my first agent, it changed my life. And what changed my life about that book was that he was really open about his writing process, and it was parallel to mine. And it was the first time, I had been told my whole, studying creative writing and growing up as a creative writer, that there was one way to do it, and it was you have to write an outline and then write your story. And here was Stephen King, and I read in On Writing, he shares, I believe, a draft of Carrie, and he has another adjective for it, but terrible first draft. So he shares this, and I said, gosh, this really is a terrible first draft. And if Stephen King can make magic out of this terrible draft and become Stephen King, then there's hope for all of us. And my process isn't a wrong process. It's really about finding the writer you are and being that writer. And I would say that was the beginning of my journey of studying the craft and, everything that I have as a philosophy now. So I owe a lot to Stephen King and that book, and I recommend it really to everyone.
Wonderful book. And then what about if you were to recommend an album, a record to people, maybe something that means a lot to you, think people should check out? What would that record or album be?
Ooh, that's a tough question. What's your favorite song? What's your favorite movie? And so I'm going to give a really general answer to that isn't specific to any artist or album, but to the writer, him or herself. And that is that, moving is really important to your creative process, and especially crossing your midline. So for those of you who are listening, that means, putting your hand from one side of your body to the other side of your body, moving it parallel. And any music that helps you to do that inspires you to get up and move and flail and really let loose, like close the curtains if you need to. But this is a really important part of the creative process and an important part to your brain. So whatever makes your feet move and makes your body move and makes you want to groove, put that on at least once a day.
Fantastic. I love that advice. And it's actually, all the studies have shown that we often get our best ideas, or most of our ideas, when we're doing some kind of that low-level physical activity, or we're out walking in nature, or we're out cycling. It's just that being out there, and especially if you can do it in nature when you're around a lot of greenery, because loads of science has been done in terms of color psychology and how the impact upon certain colors, certain vibrancies of green will affect your creativity. So I love that. So you've encouraged me to get moving. So after this interview, I'm going to go and get some music on and start moving. A final question for you. I want you to imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and you had to start from scratch. So you have all the skills that you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you. You know no one. You have to restart. What would you do? How would you restart?
How would I restart? I don't think I would change a thing, James. I love the journey that I went on, and relationships are really important to me as a person. And, it's been surprising to me, the people that I have reached out, and, it's been a little intimidating to say, hey, really famous person, would you mind talking to me for 15 minutes about writing? If you're in the right frame of mind and you're really you want to have a person-to-person conversation, people can sense your energy that's coming toward them. And I've entered a lot of really cool conversations with a lot of high-level professionals because I've entered that with curiosity and sincerity. And now I have friends, people I really love and care about, and I hope they love and care about me too, in the writing world. And so I think that would be my tool that I would go to, one, because I love it and it gives me great joy to have those kinds of conversations, but also because I've had the honor and the blessing to learn so much from people who have written, published, and lived the author lifestyle before me.
Now, if people want to learn from you, to reach out to you, to work with you as their coach, or I know you have other kind of things, you mentioned some of the retreats that you do as well, where's the best place for them to go and learn about all of that?
Yes, so my website is datewiththemuse.com, and I am not the muse, but I do facilitate time with her or dates with her. So it's time for your creative self, datewiththemuse.com.
Wonderful. Put all these links here below. Annalisa, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, talking to you about your writer's journey, your creative life. I wish you all the best with everything you're doing, and have a wonderful retreat when you come to England.
Thank you so much, James. It's been a real pleasure and an honor. I'm so glad to meet you.
If you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.